The day I found the stakes hammered into my pasture, my hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped the coffee mug I was holding. There they were, bright orange markers stabbing out of the earth like arrows, cutting across my cattle trail and pointing directly toward my barn. At first, I thought it was a surveyor's prank, or maybe some kids fooling around, until I followed the line and found a truck parked on my land with a gaudy magnetic sign. Sterling Lake's HOA Development Project. I knew instantly what it meant. Karen, the HOA president who strutted down our county road like she was the mayor, sheriff, and landowner all rolled into one. She was a mountain of a woman, always overdressed in floral blouses stretched to bursting, sunglasses perched like a crown, her voice cutting across the neighborhood like a rusty chainsaw. And now, without a single knock on my door or legal documents served, she had unrolled bulldozer tracks across my ranch. I stormed up to the workers, 3 men unloading cement bags and fencing posts, and demanded to know what in God's name they were doing. One, chewing gum like the world bored him, shrugged and said, "Orders from HOA, they're putting in a clubhouse and parking lot." Said this lot was communal. His voice was casual, but the words struck me like a cattle prod. Communal? This land had been in my family since before the HOA even existed. My great-grandfather drove cattle across these same trails. The deed bore our name clear as daylight, but Karen had never let truth slow her down. Sure enough, within 10 minutes, her SUV rolled onto my dirt road, tires crunching, dust pluming behind. She stepped out with the grandiosity of a queen dismounting her carriage. "Good morning, cowboy," she sneered. "We're just getting started. You'll be thrilled when you see the plans. Community center, pool, cabanasse, this eyesore of a pasture will finally serve the neighborhood." I tried reason. "This isn't HOA land. Check the county line, me fence marks the boundary." But she just laughed, her belly jiggling with every smug chuckle. "Oh, we checked. The HOA voted, and our bylaws allow expansion. You should be thanking me for raising your property value." Then she turned to the workers, snapping her fingers. "Keep digging. Ignore him." Something in me snapped. I'd served 2 tours overseas, fought to protect lands far from home, and here was a suburban tyrant trying to seize mine with a clipboard and a crooked grin. I called the sheriff, but by the time a deputy arrived, Karen had already paraded him through her binder of fake maps and forged documents. The deputy looked uncomfortable but finally muttered, "This looks like a civil dispute. You'll have to take it up in court." Court? By then the barn would be rubble. That night, I sat at the kitchen table staring at my deed. The ink faded but clear. My family's name a reminder of everything we had built and defended. My neighbor, Miguel, knocked and walked in, carrying his rifle slung casually over his shoulder. "You gonna let her take it?" he asked, his eyes sharp. I shook my head, but the weight of hopelessness bore down. "Law won't help us," I said. He leaned forward, his voice low. "Then we help ourselves." By dawn, word had spread. Pickup trucks rolled down my gravel drive, engines growling. Friends, neighbors, fellow ranchers, men and women I'd known all my life piled out carrying rifles, shotguns, and the kind of grit you only earn from years of backbreaking work. We didn't come for blood, but we came ready to stand. When Karen arrived again, this time with a bulldozer churning behind her, she stepped out of her SUV to find 20 of us lined up at the property line. The sun glinted off gun barrels resting against boots, crossed arms, and faces hardened into stone. No one spoke at first. The only sound was the wind whistling through the dry grass and the idle rumble of machinery waiting for orders. Karen tried to laugh, though it came out strangled. "What's this?" she demanded, scanning the line of ranchers. "You think you can intimidate me with your toys? This is HOA property now. You can't stop progress." Her voice wavered, but she puffed out her chest as if sheer volume could mask the fear creeping into her eyes. I stepped forward, holding the deed high so every worker could see. "This land belongs to the Vance family. Always has. Always will. You're trespassing. And this," I gestured to the rifles gleaming in the sun, "is the line. You cross it, you answer to us." The workers hesitated. One climbed down from the bulldozer, muttering that he wasn't getting paid enough for this. Another dropped his tools and walked off entirely. Karen shrieked after them, her voice cracking, "Cowards! You'll all regret this." But the tide had shifted, and she knew it. Still, in her arrogance, she tried one last play. She whipped out her phone, dialing the sheriff again, bellowing into the receiver that an armed mob was threatening her. What she didn't know was that the sheriff himself was already on our side. He drove up minutes later, surveyed the scene, and then turned to Karen with a frown. "You're trespassing, ma'am. Pack it up." Her face went crimson, her voice rising to an unholy pitch. "I am the HOA president. I have authority," she wailed, stomping her feet like a spoiled child. But the sheriff wasn't moved. He pointed to my deed and said simply, "Not here, you don't." The crowd erupted in cheers, rifles lifted skyward, not fired, just raised in triumph. Karen's bluster collapsed into tears. She wailed, clutching at her floral blouse, insisting she was the victim, that we were bullies, that no one respected her power. Finally, when even her last worker abandoned her, she stumbled back to her SUV, sobbing so loudly the echoes carried across the hills. The woman who once strutted like a queen now fled like a scolded child, her empire of lies left crumbling in the dust. What followed was swift and brutal for her. The county, pressured by evidence of forgery and fraud, launched an investigation. Her own board turned on her, eager to save themselves, exposing her schemes of siphoning HOA funds into her personal account. Within weeks, she wasn't just stripped of her title, she was indicted. But for us, the victory was more than legal. It was spiritual. We had drawn a line together, not with violence but with courage, with unity, with the reminder that power belongs to those who refuse to bow. And in that moment, standing shoulder to shoulder with my neighbors, rifles gleaming against the sunrise, I felt something deeper than triumph. I felt justice. The dust from Karen's SUV still lingered in the air as if the earth itself wanted to erase her tracks. But I knew better than to believe that was the end. People like her didn't crawl quietly into the shadows. They clawed, they bit, they schemed for another opening. And sure enough, the very next week, glossy envelopes appeared in every neighbor's mailbox. Inside was a letterhead stamped, Sterling Lake's HOA emergency notice, dripping with venom, painting me as a gun-toting vigilante who had endangered the safety of the community. She claimed I'd staged an armed insurrection, that I'd threatened unarmed contractors, and that the HOA had the legal right to seize my ranch as restitution. The gall of it made my blood boil, but what cut deeper was the ripple of whispers it stirred. Some folks who had cheered that day at the fence line now looked at me with doubt in their eyes. Others avoided me altogether, afraid of being dragged into the storm. It was Karen's specialty, turning neighbors against one another with lies sticky as tar. I might have stood alone if not for Lydia. She was a quiet woman who ran the feed store down the road. Never much for gossip, always steady, always sharp. She showed up at my porch with a thick folder in hand, her eyes blazing. "I used to work as an investigator for the state attorney's office," she confessed. "I know Karen's type. She's not just bluffing, she's building a case. And if we don't strike first, she'll drag you into court and bury you under her lies." Her words landed like a thunderclap. I'd known Lydia for years, but I had no idea of her past. She spread the folder on my kitchen table, page after page of documents she'd been collecting. Forged HOA minutes, altered plats, even bank statements that hinted Karen had been funneling HOA dues into a private account. "She thinks she can bury you," Lydia said, her voice low. "But we're about to bury her." Together, we began piecing the puzzle. Miguel, my neighbor with the sharp tongue and sharper aim, installed cameras along the fence line, catching Karen sneaking onto my land at night with flashlights and clipboards, measuring, plotting, searching for weaknesses. Old Man Pritchard, the retired surveyor, unearthed maps dating back to the 1940s, showing the ranch's boundaries unchanged for generations. And Lydia, relentless, tracked down a contractor Karen had stiffed 2 counties over, one willing to testify that she'd pulled the same scam before, using fake HOA authority to muscle landowners into giving up property. But as we gathered our evidence, Karen grew louder. She stormed town hall meetings, her booming voice accusing me of being a domestic threat. She called the sheriff's office daily, demanding my arrest. When deputies refused, she went over their heads to the state troopers, then the fire marshal, then even some poor clerk at the Department of Agriculture. Each time, she was slapped down, but each time she came back angrier. The breaking point came one sweltering afternoon when I found fresh tire ruts cutting across my pasture. At the end of the tracks stood a half-built wooden frame, hammered together like a skeleton rising from the earth. Karen's clubhouse. She'd come back under cover of night, dragging workers who were either desperate or too scared to refuse. And there, nailed to a post at the entrance, was a crude sign in thick black marker. Future HOA property keep out. That was it. That was war. The next morning, we gathered again at the fence line, but this time we brought more than rifles. We brought cameras, drones, witnesses. Lydia drafted a formal cease and desist letter backed with every legal citation she could summon. Miguel flew his drone overhead, broadcasting live footage to a local reporter who had caught wind of the feud. And I stood at the front, deed in hand, my voice booming across the field. You have until sundown to tear down every board. Or tomorrow, I take this to court, and you'll wish you'd never heard my family's name. Karen arrived late, flanked not by workers this time but by a private security guard in a cheap uniform. She strutted up, her face red with rage, shouting over me to the cameras. This man is a danger to society. He waves guns at law-abiding citizens. He's destroying community property. But the words rang hollow, because behind her, the cameras showed the truth. A half-built shack on clearly fenced ranchland, a sign declaring ownership without a shred of authority. The guard she'd brought looked around uneasily, realizing he'd been dragged into something far beyond his pay grade. He muttered something to her, then turned and walked away, leaving Karen sputtering, abandoned again. The final collapse came 2 weeks later in court. We filed suit against the HOA for trespassing, fraud, and damages. Karen strutted in with her binders, her floral blouse stretched to bursting, her hair sprayed into a helmet of defiance. She sneered at me across the aisle, as if the outcome were already written in her favor. But Lydia was a storm in heels. She laid out every piece of evidence, every forgery, every stolen dollar. She called the stiffed contractor to the stand, then Old Man Pritchard, then even Miguel with his drone footage. The jury watched Karen's empire unravel thread by thread, lie by lie, until there was nothing left but her shrieking denials. The judge's gavel fell like thunder. The HOA was fined into bankruptcy. Karen herself was found personally liable, stripped of her title, and referred for criminal investigation on charges of fraud and embezzlement. She wailed, collapsed into her chair, her face a mask of rage and humiliation. When the deputies escorted her out, handcuffs glinting under the fluorescent lights, the gallery erupted in whispers. Some pitied her, most didn't, and as for me, I didn't gloat. I simply walked out into the sunlight, breathing free air on land that was finally safe again. Back on the ranch, the half-built shack had already been torn down, the wood hauled off, the ground smoothed back to pasture. The cattle roamed freely once more, unaware of the war that had been fought for their grazing land. Neighbors came by with casseroles, with handshakes, with quiet apologies for ever doubting me. And Lydia, standing by my side, said softly, "She'll be a cautionary tale for years, but you'll be the one they remember for standing firm." And she was right, because it wasn't just about a ranch. It wasn't just about Karen. It was about reminding people that bullies only win when we kneel. And sometimes, the only way to protect what's ours is to rise, stand tall, and draw the line no one crosses. So I ask you now, was it right for us to stand armed and unyielding against her? Or should we have left it all to the slow wheels of the court? Where do you draw the line when power threatens your home?